It is time for the Writer's Block, our weekly look at all things sports. I'm Jenni Carlson here in the studios of the Oklahoman, joined by Cedric Golden from the Austin American-Statesman. Hello, dear friend.
What's up, buddy?
Oh, you know, there are sports, and more sports, and let's get right into this. Our lead segment today, we're going to call it the Shade segment. Come on into the shade, because in the NFL, shade seems to be popular these days. We're going to start with this, Cedric. Daniel Jones, the recently drafted Giants quarterback who had shade thrown all over him over the summer by Baker Mayfield, makes his first start over the weekend. Great debut, a Giants win. Meanwhile, you've got Baker Mayfield and the Browns still struggling offensively. Is this a little bit of karma at work here, Ced?
I don't know if it's karma, Jen, but I'm going to tell you, look, I like Baker Mayfield. He makes our jobs fun. He's good copy. He's from Austin. He's the latest great quarterback from this city. But he spends the offseason ripping into Sam Ehlinger from Texas. And then he says, I can believe Daniel Jones was taking that early. Well, you're speaking on stuff you don't need to speak on. Meanwhile, you're an NFL quarterback, and I know we've talked about this before. When you're running down the field after a touchdown and you're doing the swim move, you don't play a Norman anymore. This is the NFL, and those guys that you're showing up want to take your head off.
Yeah.
And so I think Baker needs to settle into the position of quarterback in the NFL. Don't worry about the shade. Daniel Jones took the high road. He goes, I'm just trying to learn how to play in the NFL. And when his time came, he was ready, Jen.
Yeah.
He was ready. And he's going to have some growing pains, and so is Baker. But the difference is Daniel Jones is acting with a lot more maturity than Baker. I know Baker's the cover boy. He's mowing the yard at Cleveland Stadium on TV, and he's got all the commercials. Good for him. I like him. He's fun to watch, but he needs to stop with the shade. Play football and let the other guys where I'm from, they go, let the other guys live as well.
Yeah, and I think what you say is right about the on-field stuff, because at this point, it looks to me, as I've watched the Browns, they played in that primetime spot this week with their game. They are really struggling to score points with an offense that I think a lot of people felt like was just going to march up and down the field and score touchdowns at will. It looks to me like Baker Mayfield is one of the problems right now. He is, it sort of reminds me of his second year as starter at Oklahoma. They lost a couple games early in non-conference play, lost to Houston, lost to Ohio State. You had Baker Mayfield, especially in that Houston game, just looked like he was really trying to do too much, holding the ball too long and causing issues that way. Maybe instead of taking a short play that might, move you a little closer to a first down, really looking for home runs. And when you've got guys like Odell Beckham, I get the feeling like, hey, we could make a big play at any time, but it really feels like Baker Mayfield needs to find some traction within the offense. Cedric, we're only a couple weeks into this NFL schedule, so I'm not ready to, sound the alarm on Baker Mayfield and the Browns, and I'm not ready to crown the Giants and Daniel Jones fixed either. But I do think as it relates to the Browns, they got a tough schedule coming up, and while they finish a lot easier, you don't want to look down the road too far. Otherwise, you might see the Browns 2-5, 1-6. This is a team that's got some tough games coming up.
I told you before the season, they're still the Browns. Until further notice, they're still the Browns. I don't care what you look like on paper. You still play in the AFC North. You still play with the rough and tumble Baltimore Ravens, the desperate Cincinnati Bengals, and the beyond desperate Pittsburgh Steelers, who are probably the best 0-3 team in the league. So I think that Baker has had some injuries up front on his offensive line. You've got the ego of Odell Beckham. 9 targets for Odell. That's not going to fly, Jen. He's used to 14 or 15, and now his boy Juice Landry is on the other side. Your tight end David Njoku is out. Yeah. So you've had some injuries, and the elephant in the room, Freddie Kitchens, not an NFL head coach. I'm sorry. He's in over his head. He's a glorified offensive coordinator who was Baker's buddy. They moved him up to the head coaching job. And we haven't even talked about Baker blasting Hugh Jackson who was on his way out the door, the former coach. Stuff that a rookie quarterback just shouldn't be doing. So I think that the Cleveland Browns, until further notice, I don't care how talented they are, and they are monstrous on defense, Jen, with Myles Garrett and guys of that ilk. They're really good on defense. But until further notice, they're still the Cleveland Browns. Baker needs to clean up his act, not only on the field but off the field. Let's get to what's important, and that's winning football games. Don't let the other stuff take precedent over what you're paid to do.
Well, and, a lot of shade thrown by Baker over the years. We know that. We said this was the NFL shade segment, so said this might be an all-timer. In Philadelphia, a bad situation, a building fire, an apartment fire. As I understand it, an Eagles fan who also happened to be had some firefighting in his background, helped to save some people out of that building, including some kids that basically get tossed out to him. And Cedric, amid this interview talking about saving these kids, this Eagles fan throws perhaps the biggest shade I've ever seen at Nelson Agholar, the Eagles receiver, who's had some bad drops these early games. He says, I'm catching kids, unlike Agholar. Just had to get that out there. It was, Cedric, it was an all-timer for shade.
My man just started throwing babies out the window. We was catching them, unlike Agholar.
Only in Philadelphia. Only in Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love. You're talking about kids being saved, and you had to take time out to stick it in Nelson Agholar's back. Props to Nelson Agholar for inviting the guy to a game. He's trying to find him, and he wants to invite him to a game. I think that's the all-time classy move. 90% of the players in the league are blasting this guy on Instagram and Twitter. Nelson Agholar, who actually had a really good game last week, he caught 2 touchdown passes. I know because I got my butt kicked in my fantasy league, and Agholar was part of the reason I lost. So I know that Agholar had a good game. He took the high road. I'm glad the kids are safe. This fan has gone viral. I'm sure he didn't think that was coming, but he's probably going to find himself sitting at a game and cheering on Nelson Agholar. I think that's called a happy ending.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is funny because everything is good. I mean, everything worked out great. But yeah, you're right, Cedric, what you said about happening in Philly. I mean, the place that boos Santa, and I mean, all of the things that have happened over the years with Philadelphia fans, with Eagles fans, to have this become a moment they're going to be known for forever. And you know what would be great is that while he's there at the game, as you said, with Agholar's tickets, they should show this guy on the Jumbotron. It would create.
They will. You know they will.
It would be the best moment of all time. It would be so fun. And yeah, I think they will too. I can't wait to see what that scene is like at that Eagles game. Okay, so from shade to segment 2, we're going to talk about the craziest game. Okay, this may not be the craziest game this year, Cedric, but it's got to rank up there. Earlier this week, Diamondbacks, Cardinals, playing in Arizona. They go 19 innings, almost 7 hours. It was 6 hours, 53 minutes, a few stats. By the way, it was only a 3-2 game. So, I mean, not much scoring, which is unbelievable. But Diamondbacks used 27 players in this game. There were 46 strikeouts, which was almost a single game record in Major League Baseball. Wow. And they played again the next day, an afternoon game of all things. So crazy game won by the Diamondbacks, but it got us thinking crazy games we've witnessed. Cedric, what tops your list as it relates to long games, extra innings, overtimes? What stands out to you?
It's not even close. Texas Boston College NCAA Regional, May 30th, 2009. 684 pitches, 171 at-bats. Texas won 3-2. And there was, the game lasted a grand total of, drum roll, 7 hours and 2 minutes.
Oh.
Yeah, and the game was won on an infield single by a guy named Travis Tucker. It was an eventual game-winning RBI, infield single, in the top of the 25th inning. And Travis Tucker was the hero of that game, Jen. And he went 2 for 12
Oh.
in that game. 2 out of 12. And Austin Wood will go down in Texas lore. He threw 12 in third innings of no-hit ball. I think it was 190 pitches. And,
wow.
Not surprisingly, he leaves Texas and goes to minor league ball. And before he could really get going, guess what he had to do? Get Tommy John surgery. He was never the same after that. But I know he's part of the Texas baseball lore, but that is the craziest, longest game. The weird thing about it, Jen, is I was there to Kirk Bowles was writing the daily column, and our beat writer, I think it was Alan Trudeau, he was writing the gamer. I was there to bring back a column for the next couple of days or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, I think I'm going to leave in the 6th inning. And there I was 19 innings later, still sitting there. I couldn't leave. You can't leave when you just want to really figure out who won the game. So that's the one that I will never forget, and it's been 10 years.
Yeah, well, I've got one that's a little more recent. This one only happened a couple years ago, 2017. But it was a Women's College World Series game. Softball event happens here in Oklahoma City to become a regular in the or late spring, early summer, not only here but on ESPN. And Sooners, Oklahoma, playing Florida in the championship series. That's the best of 3 games. And these two really great teams, really fantastic, pitching, hitting, the whole 9 yards. And we knew it was going to be a great game because when you've got great teams in a championship situation, that sort of thing happens. But this became something completely different. 17 innings. It was a 7-5 game that on several occasions, Cedric, probably much like that game with Texas and Boston College with the baseball, you sort of think if a team in a situation like that, if they get any type of lead, it's gotta hold. Well, we had a couple instances in that game where teams took multi-run leads and still the other guy was able to come back. There were 3 pitchers that threw complete games within that game, 7-inning games or more. 3 of them threw that. We saw an NHL Stanley Cup playoff game, start and finish before that game got over. There was just all kinds of craziness. Blue deadline, obviously. I was there. I was in Kirk's situation and being the columnist at the game. But we did the 7th inning stretch, which was actually the 5th inning stretch with softball being only a 7-inning game. They do that in the 5th. We did it 3 times, the 5th, the 10th, the 15th. So it was a tiebreaker. It was crazy, but it was a fantastic game, an epic game, one where you saw Shay Knighton, Oklahoma's talented infielder who has now graduated. She hits a home run in the 17th. Then Oklahoma has to get out of it one more time. They get out of it with Paige Lowry, another talented Sooner, gets the out, gets them out of it. They win. Just stuff that you don't ever forget. But that Diamondbacks game, Cedric, I know a lot of people around here, when they think about long games, they also think about the year several years ago that Oklahoma State's football team went to Tulsa and got weather delayed didn't even start the game until I think after midnight, didn't get done till 2:30, something like that. But as far as games that weren't weather delayed, I mean, extra inning, softball, baseball, whatever, that to me, Cedric, that's got to take the cake, because those things you just, like you said, you couldn't walk away. Nobody can walk away from those games. And,
and those games are pretty slow paced. So it just, between innings, the music's going, and it got to a point where people had left, but then they started to come back. And then it seemed like people were showing up in like the 14th or 15th inning. You see them walking in, and you're like, I think they may have just shown up here because they were listening on the radio, and I think they were letting people in. So,
yeah.
In football, you remember that 74-72 LSU A&M game from last season. I was watching that one on television, and I can't remember. I think I was up till 2 in the morning because I just couldn't tear my eyes away from it.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Well, great to reminisce about those games that will always be in our memory banks. Let's go to segment 3, Cedric, and I think this might fit. I haven't done a Say What segment in a while, but I think this fits for Say What. We're finding out earlier this week that University of Houston, who played Oklahoma, well known down in your neck of the woods in Austin, sort of one of those, programs that's always on the cusp of being, pushing around to Power 5, being in the rankings, those sorts of things. Off to a rough start this year. 1-3 are the Cougars. And now news that D'Eriq King, their quarterback, and at least one other guy, a receiver at this point, they're saying we're going to redshirt the rest of the year. Now, D'Eriq King has said he's not planning to leave Houston. I don't know if that's going to hold up over the course of the year or not, but they're saying we want to stay, we're not having a good year. Cedric, we knew that this 4-game redshirt rule, which was started last year, we've seen coaches and teams kind of working through how do we use that. We saw some fallout last year with some players doing what these Houston players are doing, but they transferred. They basically said, I'm not getting the playing time I wanted or whatever. I'm going to transfer. I'm done after 4 games. That was a little bit of an unintended consequence when it comes to sort of a free agency feeling. But this is something else entirely. Does this feel like the start of maybe, I don't know. What if a coach said we're gonna redshirt all our best guys? I've got 6 guys that are really good, but we're not a very good team this year. We're gonna redshirt them and try to be better next year. Is this the start of something that could be really a change in college football moving forward?
Yeah, and it's not a good one. I know when the NCAA came up with this rule, it was about freshmen. Let's see if these freshmen are ready to play. And if the freshmen play 4 games and it seems apparent that they're not ready to go, that they're not fully developed, then we could sit them down. But guess what happens, Jen? We got a loophole. And now you got seniors figuring out that I can take the rest of the year off and keep my options open. And D'Eriq King, if you've seen him play, Jen, and I know you have because they played the Sooners, he is electric. He is already a very good quarterback. Yeah. He just happens to be on a crappy team. And so Dana Holgorsen will have me believe that D'Eriq King is going to sit out the rest of the year. And then come the spring of 2020, we're not going to see his name in the portal. D'Eriq King is going to the portal. Lincoln Riley already said after they beat Houston, he's a great quarterback. He's one of the best quarterbacks we've ever played against. And Lincoln Riley is, guess what, Jen? The quarterback whisperer. Yes, he is. The quarterback whisperer, who is the king of transfer quarterbacks winning Heisman trophies. Jalen Hurts, the latest off the assembly line. And guess what after this year? He gone, and D'Eriq King will be on Lincoln Riley's wish list. Why wouldn't he want to go to OU? A great program and a great conference, and a guy that sends quarterbacks to the NFL. He just got a 5'10" quarterback drafted number 1 overall. So I like Dana Holgorsen, but Dana, let's be real. You really think D'Eriq King is going to be a Houston Cougar next season? Not. I don't care what he says now. Things change, situations change. And college football has a real problem on its hands.
Yeah, and I think what you said when you first started, Cedric, I think is the thing that's going to have to be talked about by decision makers in college football, in the NCAA, whatever level you want to say. This is a rule that intended to allow coaches, players even, to see when they're younger, do they fit? Are they ready? If it's maybe playing a couple games early, or if a guy develops, if they're planning to redshirt a guy and he develops better than they think, and at the end of the year, if he's then able to play, maybe he plays towards the end of the year and finds a spot where he can contribute. This was a rule expected to help incoming freshmen or transfers, I suppose, maybe junior college guys you could loop in there. But I don't think that the intent, and we saw this last year at Oklahoma State, Jalen McCleskey, actually the hero in that Tulane win over Houston, maybe one of the games that pushed D'Eriq King to say, I'm gonna sit out, I'm gonna redshirt. He decided after 4 games at Oklahoma State last year that he was going to redshirt and then transfer. So, he was one of those early guys to see the loophole, to say, I'm gonna sit out, I'm gonna look elsewhere. So I don't know what happens to D'Eriq King. I'm like you, Cedric. I'm skeptical that he is a Houston Cougar this time next year. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I mean, isn't this somewhat, I don't know if easy is the right word, but isn't there a fix in this that the legislation or this rule could be changed to apply only to players in their first year with a program? I mean, couldn't that be written in tomorrow and change what we're potentially seeing happening in college football?
Absolutely, and they're going to do that, Jen. This was not intended for seniors to skirt the transfer rules and use a red shirt to waive their options. This is for young players. So it's legal right now, but I'd be very surprised if it didn't change in the off season, because you got really good football players who are going to be taking advantage of this rule. And what it does also, Jen, is it messes up the competitive balance in college football. We knew the Houston Cougars aren't very good this year. We know they're not going to be good with Diamondbacks King on the sidelines now. That's a disservice not only to his teammates in the locker room, but also to the people that are paying good money to watch him play. So Diamondbacks King, more power to him. He's not breaking the rules, and neither are these other guys that are going to be taking advantage. But I think this might be a one-off. I don't know that this will be happening this time next year. They're going to change that rule.
I think they have to. I mean, I'm with you. I think it does throw things, in that you're not expecting to be different sort of out of the blue. Teammates, as you say, opponents, just a variety of things that weren't supposed to be happening because of this are happening. We were talking after the news broke about Diamondbacks King in Houston and what this might all mean. Back in the early 80s, when Kansas State was very bad, this was pre-Bill Snyder, and this didn't involve Bill Snyder. This was before he arrived in Manhattan and really turned that program around. They had basically a year or two where they said, we're going to redshirt a bunch of guys. We're going to redshirt, and then we're going to redshirt a bunch of older guys in an attempt to develop the program, get better, get the footing, all that sort of thing. It was unexpected, largely unprecedented at that point that a program would try that. Now, people that remember how bad K-State was, I think you could say that, they were looking for any way to try to get in a place where they weren't, losing every game. I mean, that was a team that didn't win at all for stretches during that time in their program's history. So the idea of a coach or a group of players maybe saying, we're going to set out, that's not without, it's happened at some times before, but not like this, not players saying, taking control. And I think as much as anything, Cedric, player control in the NCAA, that's not been something we've seen a lot of. The NCAA does not give players and student athletes much control over their situation, over, what's going on. So the fact that players are seeing this as a way to take control, again, I mean, I think what you said about why this will change, why they'll look at it and add some stipulations that won't allow this to happen, as much as anything, the NCAA is not about letting players and student athletes take control. I think that as much as anything is going to get this changed.
I agree, and it's kind of fun to see the players finally get something since they're not getting money. They're not getting money and putting in 50, 60 hours a week on sports. So good for the players, looking out for the players. It's about time someone did.
Yeah, well, we'll see what happens with that. Obviously, a lot more to come on that situation. We'll talk about football. Who knows? Maybe there'll be another 19-inning game to talk about next week. You just never know. So come on back to the Writer's Block. We'll see you then.